Naomi Fletcher had turned down 12 marriage proposals in the span of a single year, and the town of Lincoln, Nebraska, was running out of eligible bachelors willing to risk their pride. The year was 1876, and in a frontier town where women were scarce and matrimony was often more about survival than sentiment, her repeated refusals had become the talk of every saloon, general store, and church gathering for miles around. She stood behind the counter of her late father's dry goods store on a blistering August afternoon, tallying the week's receipts with careful precision. Naomi was 23 years old, which by frontier standards made her practically ancient in terms of unmarried women. Her father had died the previous winter, leaving her the store in a small house on the edge of town. Most women in her position would have accepted the first proposal that came along, grateful for the security a husband could provide. But Naomi had watched her mother wither away in a loveless marriage, had seen the light fade from her eyes year after year, and she had made herself a promise that she would rather die alone than settle for a man she did not love. The first proposal had come from Samuel Hawthorne, the banker's son, who had offered her financial security and social standing. The second from Douglas Pritchard, who owned the largest ranch within 50 miles. Then came the blacksmith, the deputy, the schoolteacher, the railroad supervisor, and 6 others, each with their own version of what they considered an attractive offer. Some had been kind, others presumptuous, but none had stirred anything in her heart beyond polite appreciation or mild annoyance. The bell above the door chimed, and Naomi looked up to see Mrs. Abernathy, the pastor's wife, entering with her usual expression of concern mixed with disapproval. "Good afternoon, Naomi," the older woman said, her voice carrying that particular tone that suggested an unwanted conversation was about to unfold. "I heard that Jonathan Mills proposed to you last week at the church social." Naomi kept her expression neutral as she set down her pencil. "News travels fast, Mrs. Abernathy. And you turned him down just like all the others. It was not a question. Child, I say this out of concern for your well-being. You cannot continue this way. A woman alone running a business, it is not natural. People are beginning to talk." "People have been talking since my father passed," Naomi replied, her voice gentle but firm. "I have managed the store quite well on my own, and I see no reason to marry simply to satisfy the town's sense of propriety." Mrs. Abernathy leaned across the counter, lowering her voice. "It is not just propriety, dear. It is about your future. What happens when you are older and have no one to care for you? What happens if the store fails? A husband provides security, protection." Naomi had heard these arguments a dozen times before, from well-meaning friends and concerned neighbors. "I would rather face an uncertain future alone than a certain one with the wrong person," she said quietly. The older woman sighed heavily, shaking her head. "You are waiting for something that does not exist, child. Love, romance, the sort of thing you read about in those novels I see you ordering from back east. Real life is not like that. Marriage is about partnership, commitment, building a life together. The tender feelings, if they come at all, come later." After Mrs. Abernathy left, Naomi finished her tallying and locked up the store for the evening. She walked home through the dusty streets of Lincoln, watching as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The town had grown considerably in recent years, with the railroad bringing new settlers and opportunities. The population had swelled to nearly 3,000 souls, and new buildings seemed to spring up every month. Her house was small but well-maintained, with a garden she tended in the early mornings before opening the store. She let herself in, lit the lamps, and prepared a simple supper. As she ate alone at the small table, she wondered if Mrs. Abernathy might be right. Perhaps she was chasing an impossible dream, holding out for a connection that only existed in the pages of books. But then she remembered her parents, the cold silence that had filled their home, the way her father had thrown himself into work to avoid spending time with his wife, the way her mother had grown bitter and resentful as the years passed. No, Naomi thought firmly. Loneliness was preferable to that kind of slow death. 3 days later, on a Saturday morning when the town was bustling with weekend activity, Naomi was restocking shelves when she became aware of someone watching her. She turned to find a stranger standing just inside the doorway, his hat in his hands, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He was tall, lean in the way of men who spent their lives in the saddle, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that brushed his collar. His face was all angles and planes, weathered by wind and sun, with a straight nose and a strong jaw. But it was his eyes that held her attention, a deep brown that seemed to look straight through all her carefully constructed defenses to something deeper, something she had kept hidden even from herself. They stood there for a long moment, neither speaking, and Naomi felt something shift inside her chest, like the turning of a key in a lock she had not known existed. He did not smile, did not move, simply looked at her with those steady brown eyes, and in that look was a question as clear as if he had spoken it aloud. Yes, she thought, and the certainty of it shocked her. Yes. The moment broke when another customer entered the store, an elderly farmer asking about nails. Naomi served him with her usual efficiency, but her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped the purchase. When the farmer left, she turned back to find the stranger still standing there, still watching her. "Can I help you?" she asked, and her voice came out softer than she intended. He stepped forward, moving with an easy grace that reminded her of wild things, of the coyotes she sometimes saw at dusk. "Quinn Zeller," he said, his voice low and rough like gravel underfoot. "I am looking for work. Heard in town that you might need help with deliveries." Naomi had indeed been struggling with the heavier deliveries since her father's death, often having to hire temporary help or impose upon her few remaining friends. "I might," she admitted. "Do you have references?" Quinn pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket and handed it to her. As she unfolded it, their fingers brushed, and she felt that same jolt of recognition, of rightness. The letter was from a ranch owner in Wyoming, attesting to Quinn's character, work ethic, and reliability. "This says you worked as a ranch hand," she observed. "Why leave to do deliveries for a dry goods store?" Something flickered across his face, too quick to read. "Needed a change," he said simply. "Been drifting for a while now, figured it might be time to settle somewhere." There were 100 reasons she should send him away, should place an advertisement and wait for someone local, someone with connections in town who could be vouched for beyond a single letter. But she looked into those brown eyes again and found herself saying, "When can you start?" "Now, if you need me to." And just like that, Quinn Zeller became part of her daily life. He proved to be as reliable as his reference suggested, arriving each morning before she opened the store, loading the delivery wagon with quiet efficiency, and returning in the late afternoon to help with inventory and heavy lifting. He spoke little, but his presence filled the space in a way that was both comforting and unsettling. The town noticed immediately, of course. A strange man working for the woman who had turned down 12 proposals was fodder for endless speculation. The men who had been rejected watched with suspicious eyes, and the women who had been hoping to see Naomi humbled by spinsterhood whispered behind their fans. Naomi tried to ignore the gossip, but it was impossible to escape entirely. One evening, as she was closing the store, Deputy Marshal Clarence Hoffman appeared, his expression stern. "Miss Fletcher, I need to speak with you about your new employee." Naomi set down the broom she had been using to sweep the floor. "What about him?" "He is a stranger with no ties to the community." "How much do you really know about him? That letter could be forged." "It could be," Naomi agreed, keeping her voice level, "but I do not believe it is. Quinn has been nothing but professional and hardworking." The deputy stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Naomi, I asked you to marry me 6 months ago. You know I care about your well-being. This man, he could be anyone, a drifter, an outlaw, someone running from the law." "He could be," she repeated. "Or he could simply be what he appears to be, a man looking for honest work. Thank you for your concern, deputy, but I am quite capable of making my own decisions." Clarence's jaw tightened. "You have made that abundantly clear over the past year. But mark my words, if this Quinn Zeller causes any trouble, if he harms you or anyone else in this town, it will be on your head." After he left, Naomi stood alone in the dimly lit store, her hands clenched at her sides. She knew the deputy's concern came partly from genuine care and partly from wounded pride, but it still rankled. She had spent the past year fighting for her independence, for the right to make her own choices, and she would not surrender that fight now. Quinn said nothing about the deputy's visit the next morning, though she suspected he had heard about it. The town was small enough that secrets were nearly impossible to keep. Instead, he went about his work with the same quiet competence, and Naomi found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, trying to understand the pull she felt toward him. It was not just his appearance, though she could not deny that he was handsome in a rough-hewn way that made her pulse quicken. It was something deeper, something in the way he moved through the world with a kind of quiet confidence, the way he treated everyone with the same respectful distance, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, when he thought she was not paying attention. 2 weeks after he started working for her, Quinn was loading the delivery wagon when a wheel came loose, sending several crates tumbling to the ground. Naomi rushed outside to find him already gathering the scattered goods, his expression frustrated. "I checked that wheel yesterday," he muttered. "It was secure." Naomi knelt beside him to help collect the items, and that was when she noticed the suspicious gouges in the wood where the wheel attached to the axle. Someone had deliberately damaged it. "This was not an accident," she said quietly. Quinn's expression darkened as he examined the damage. "No, it was not. You have enemies in this town, Miss Fletcher. Rejected suitors, more likely," she said with a bitter laugh. "Men who do not appreciate being told no." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw anger flash in his eyes, not directed at her but on her behalf. "Any man who would sabotage your business out of spite is not a man worth having." "I quite agree," she said, "but it does complicate matters. I cannot have my livelihood destroyed because someone's pride was wounded." Quinn was silent for a long moment, still holding her gaze. Then he said, "I can fix this. But Miss Fletcher, Naomi, if I may call you that, you need to know that this might get worse before it gets better. Some men do not know how to accept rejection gracefully." The sound of her name on his lips sent warmth spreading through her chest. "You may call me Naomi," she said softly, "and I would appreciate your honesty about these matters. I may be stubborn, but I am not foolish." They worked together to repair the wagon, and as they did, Quinn began to talk. He told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his parents to fever when he was 16, about the years he had spent drifting from ranch to ranch, never quite finding a place that felt like home. His words were simple, unadorned, but she heard the loneliness in them, the same loneliness that echoed in her own heart. "Why Lincoln?" she asked as they tested the repaired wheel. Of all the towns you could have settled in, why here? Quinn straightened, wiping his hands on his work pants. Honestly, I was passing through, planning to head further west, but then I walked past your store and I saw you through the window. He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. You were helping an old woman pick out fabric, and you were so patient with her, so kind. And I thought, this is someone worth knowing. This is somewhere I could stay. Naomi's heart hammered in her chest. You decided to stay because you saw me being kind to a customer. I decided to stay because I saw someone who treated others with genuine compassion, not just politeness. There is a difference. He met her eyes again, and that same wordless communication passed between them. I have been alone for a long time, Naomi. I know what it looks like when someone else understands that feeling. She wanted to say something, to acknowledge the truth in his words, but the moment was interrupted by the arrival of a customer. As she went back inside to mind the store, she felt as though the world had shifted slightly on its axis, revealing new possibilities she had not dared to imagine. Over the following weeks, the incidents of sabotage continued. Deliveries were delayed when supplies were mysteriously damaged. Customers received notes warning them against doing business with the store, and Naomi found threatening letters slipped under her door. She reported each incident to the sheriff, but without proof of who was responsible. There was little he could do through it all. Quinn remained steady. He began arriving earlier and staying later, making sure she got home safely each evening, checking the store for signs of tampering before she opened each morning. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side, and Naomi found herself looking forward to their conversations, to the moments when his hand would brush hers as they reached for the same item, to the sound of his rare laughter when she said something that amused him. One evening in late September, as the first chill of autumn touched the air, Quinn was walking Naomi home when they encountered Jonathan Mills, the 12th man she had rejected. He was clearly drunk, weaving slightly as he blocked their path. "Well, if it is not Miss High and Mighty Fletcher," Jonathan slurred. "Too good for any of us respectable men, but happy to take up with a drifter with no name and no past." "Step aside, Mills," Quinn said quietly, his voice carrying a note of warning. Jonathan laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Or what? You will defend her honor. She has no honor to defend, leading men on all year, making fools of us all." "I led no one on," Naomi said firmly, though her hands trembled. "I was honest with every man who approached me. I am sorry if my honesty hurt your pride, but that does not give you the right to harass me." "Your honesty." Jonathan stepped closer, and Quinn immediately moved between them. "You are just a cold woman who would rather play at being a man than accept her proper place. Your father should have married you off years ago, but he was too soft, and now look at you, disgracing his memory by carrying on with a saddle tramp." Quinn's fist connected with Jonathan's jaw so fast that Naomi barely saw him move. The drunk man went down hard, landing in the dust of the street. Quinn stood over him, his body tense, his hands still clenched. "You can insult me all you want," Quinn said, his voice deadly calm, "but you will not speak about her that way. Not now, not ever. Do you understand?" Jonathan struggled to his feet, wiping blood from his split lip. For a moment, Naomi thought he might charge at Quinn, but something in the other man's stance must have warned him against it. Instead, he spat in the dirt and staggered away, muttering curses. Quinn turned to Naomi, and she saw the concern in his eyes. "Are you all right?" "I should be asking you that," she said, reaching for his hand. His knuckles were already beginning to bruise. "You should not have hit him. He could press charges." "Let him try," Quinn said. "I am not sorry, Naomi. I know you can defend yourself with words, and you do it well, but that man crossed a line." They continued walking toward her house, and Naomi did not let go of his hand. When they reached her front door, she paused, looking up at him in the fading light. "Quinn, these past weeks, working with you, getting to know you, it has meant more to me than I can properly express." "It has meant everything to me," he said simply. She knew she should go inside, should maintain the proper distance that society expected between an unmarried woman and her employee. But instead, she found herself saying, "Would you like to come in for coffee?" His eyes searched her face, and she knew he understood what she was really asking, the risk she was taking by inviting him in, the gossip it would fuel if anyone saw. "Are you sure?" "I am sure of very little in this world," she admitted. "But I am sure that I want to spend more time with you, away from the store, away from the eyes of the town. I want to know you, Quinn Zeller. All of you." He followed her inside, and she lit the lamps while he stood in her small sitting room, looking around with quiet interest. The space was simple but comfortable, with books lining one wall and her mother's quilt draped over the sofa. "You read a lot," he observed, running his fingers along the spines of the books. "Reading was my escape when I was younger," she said from the kitchen as she prepared the coffee. "My parents were not happy together, and books offered me a glimpse of what life could be like, what love could be like." "Is that why you turned down all those proposals?" he asked. "Because you wanted what you read about in books?" Naomi carried the coffee into the sitting room and sat down on the sofa, gesturing for him to join her. "Partly, but more because I saw what a loveless marriage did to my mother. It destroyed her, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but bitterness and regret. I swore I would never let that happen to me." Quinn sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. "I understand that. My parents loved each other deeply. Even when times were hard, even when we had nothing, they had each other. After they died, I have been searching for that same kind of connection, that same certainty. I had begun to think it did not exist, that maybe it had died with them. And now," she whispered. He set down his coffee cup and turned to face her fully. "Now I think I have been looking in all the wrong places. I thought I needed to keep moving, to search harder, to travel further. But maybe what I needed was to stop running and recognize what was right in front of me." Naomi's breath caught as he reached up to cup her cheek, his calloused thumb brushing across her skin with surprising gentleness. "I am not good with words like you are," he continued. "I do not know how to make pretty speeches or declarations. But Naomi, from the moment I saw you, I knew. I know it sounds impossible, but I knew you were someone I could love for the rest of my life." "It does not sound impossible," she said, leaning into his touch, "because I knew too. That first day when you looked at me, it was like you were asking me something important, and my whole heart answered yes before my mind even understood the question." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she met him halfway. Their lips touched softly at first, tentatively, and then with growing certainty. Naomi had been kissed before, clumsy stolen kisses from boys when she was younger, but this was different. This was like coming home after a long journey, like finding water after crossing a desert. This was everything she had been waiting for. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he said. "I want to court you properly, not give the town any more ammunition against you." "The town will talk regardless," Naomi said, but she appreciated his consideration. "But yes, I would like that. I would like to be courted by you, Quinn Zeller." They sat together for another hour, talking about everything and nothing, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for their futures. When Quinn finally left, walking back to the boarding house where he rented a room, Naomi sat alone in her quiet house and felt, for the first time in a year, genuinely happy. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Naomi had experienced with her previous suitors. Quinn did not try to impress her with gifts or grand gestures. Instead, he offered her small, thoughtful kindnesses. He brought her wildflowers he picked on his morning rides. He repaired the loose step on her porch without being asked. He listened when she talked about her dreams of expanding the store, and he offered practical suggestions without trying to take over. They took walks together on Sunday afternoons, always in full view of anyone who cared to watch, maintaining a respectable distance even as their feelings deepened. They had dinner together at the town's small restaurant, where the food was mediocre but the company was perfect. They attended church services side by side, ignoring the stares and whispers that followed them. The town remained divided in their opinions. Some admired Naomi for holding out for love rather than settling for convenience. Others thought she was foolish for choosing a drifter over the established men who had courted her. The 12 rejected suitors formed their own bitter faction, spreading rumors about Quinn's past and speculating about his true intentions. It was Deputy Hoffman who brought the most serious accusation. One morning in October, he arrived at the store with the sheriff, his expression grim. "Miss Fletcher, we need to speak with your employee," the sheriff said, his tone apologetic but firm. Naomi felt her stomach drop. "What is this about?" "There has been a robbery at the bank," Hoffman said. "The description of one of the men matches Mr. Zeller. We need him to account for his whereabouts last night." Quinn emerged from the back room, his expression calm despite the accusation. "I was at the boarding house all evening. Mrs. Patterson can confirm it. I had dinner with her and the other boarders, then went to my room to read." "Convenient," Hoffman said coldly. "Or perhaps Mrs. Patterson is simply covering for you. Or perhaps you are so determined to see Naomi unmarried that you are willing to accuse an innocent man of a crime," Quinn replied, his voice level but hard. The sheriff held up a hand. "Now, let us all remain calm. Mr. Zeller, would you be willing to come to the office and answer some questions? Purely voluntary, of course." "Of course," Quinn agreed. He looked at Naomi and she saw the reassurance in his eyes. "I will be back soon." But he was not back soon. Hours passed, and Naomi grew increasingly anxious. She closed the store early and went to the sheriff's office, demanding to know what was happening. "They are questioning him," the secretary said nervously. "I cannot tell you more than that, Miss Fletcher." She was about to argue when the door to the sheriff's office opened and Quinn emerged, followed by the sheriff and a furious-looking Deputy Hoffman. "You are free to go, Mr. Zeller," the sheriff said. "Your alibi checks out, and the actual robbers were apprehended trying to cross the state line." "I apologize for the inconvenience." Hoffman looked like he wanted to protest, but one sharp look from the sheriff silenced him. Quinn walked past them without a word, taking Naomi's arm and guiding her out of the office. Once they were outside, she turned to him. "Are you all right?" "I am fine," he assured her. "Hoffman tried his best to trip me up to find inconsistencies in my story, but the truth is simple and does not change. Eventually, word came that they caught the real robbers and there was nothing more he could do." "This has to stop," Naomi said, her voice shaking with anger. "This harassment, these accusations, I will not tolerate it anymore." Quinn stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. They were standing in the middle of the street and people were watching, but Naomi found she did not care. "Naomi, I need to tell you something and I need you to listen carefully." Her heart began to race. "What is it?" "I love you," he said simply. "I love your strength, your kindness, your unwillingness to settle for less than you deserve. I love the way you stand up for what you believe in, even when it costs you. I love who I am when I am with you." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. I know we have not known each other long by most people's standards, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I want to spend the rest of my days with you. I want to help you build your business, raise a family with you, grow old beside you. But I need to know if you feel the same way, because if you do not, if you have any doubts, I would rather know now. Naomi felt tears prick her eyes. This was nothing like the 12 proposals she had received before. Those had been transactions, negotiations, offers of security in exchange for domestic labor and social respectability. This was different. This was a man bearing his soul, offering her not just his name and protection, but his whole heart. "I love you too," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I love you so much it terrifies me sometimes. I spent so long protecting my heart, building walls to keep people out, and then you came along and saw right through all of it. You saw me, the real me, and you loved me anyway." "Not anyway," Quinn corrected gently. "Because of who you are, every stubborn, independent, beautiful part of you." He did not kneel, did not make a grand show of it. He simply stood there in the dusty street, holding her hands, and asked her with his eyes the same question he had asked her that first day in the store, and she answered the same way. "Yes," she said aloud this time. "Yes, Quinn, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and she heard him let out a breath that sounded like relief and joy and coming home all at once. Around them, the townspeople who had been watching began to react. Some smiled and applauded. Others shook their heads in disapproval. Naomi did not care about any of it. All that mattered was the man holding her, the future they would build together. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church. Naomi wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her taller frame, and carried wildflowers that Quinn had picked that morning. The church was half full, with those who supported them on one side and those who came out of curiosity or a sense of duty on the other. The 12 men she had rejected were notably absent, which was probably for the best. Naomi had heard through the gossip network that most of them had moved on, some already courting other women, others having left town entirely. She wished them well, hoped they would find happiness, but felt no regret about her choices. As she walked down the aisle toward Quinn, who stood at the altar looking both nervous and elated, Naomi thought about the journey that had brought her here. All those proposals, all those rejections, all the criticism and gossip and pressure to settle for less than she wanted. It had all led to this moment, to this man who looked at her like she hung the moon and stars. "Dearly beloved," the pastor began, and Naomi felt Quinn's hand close around hers, warm and steady and sure. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but the way Quinn spoke them made them sound like poetry. When he promised to love and cherish her, she believed him with every fiber of her being. When she promised the same to him, she meant it with a depth that surprised even her. "You may kiss your bride," the pastor said, and Quinn did sweetly and thoroughly, while the church erupted in a mixture of applause and scandalized gasps at the passion of it. They held a small reception at Naomi's house, with food prepared by Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house and a few other friends who had supported them. It was nothing like the grand affairs that some of the wealthier families in town held, but it was perfect in its simplicity and sincerity. As the sun set and the guests began to leave, Quinn and Naomi stood together on the porch of what was now their home, watching the sky turn purple and gold. "No regrets?" Quinn asked softly. "Not a single one," Naomi replied, leaning into his embrace. "You?" "Only that I did not find you sooner," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "But I suppose we both needed to take our own paths to get here." They spent their wedding night in the house that had once felt too empty, too quiet, but now felt full of possibility. Quinn was gentle and patient, taking his time to learn what pleased her, and Naomi discovered that physical intimacy with someone you loved was nothing like the clinical, embarrassing descriptions she had read in medical texts, or the vague, romanticized versions in novels. It was better, more profound, a connection that went beyond the physical to something almost spiritual. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Quinn traced patterns on her shoulder with his fingertips. "Tell me about your plans for the store," he said. "I know you have ideas about expanding." Naomi smiled, touched that he wanted to talk about her dreams even now. "I want to add a section for ladies' ready-made clothing," she said. "Most women around here make their own clothes or have them sewn by a dressmaker, but I think there is a market for quality ready-made items, especially among the women who work and do not have time for sewing. And I want to stock more books. There is a hunger for reading material that the general store does not satisfy." "We will make it happen," Quinn said confidently. "Together." That word, together, became the foundation of their life. Over the following months, they worked side by side to expand the store. Quinn used his savings to invest in inventory, and Naomi used her business acumen to choose products she knew would sell. The ready-made clothing section was an immediate success, particularly among the working women of Lincoln. The book corner became a gathering place where people would browse and discuss their favorite titles. But success brought new challenges. Some of the other merchants in town, particularly those who had been friends with Naomi's rejected suitors, saw her thriving business as a threat. They tried to undercut her prices, spread rumors about the quality of her goods, and even attempted to convince suppliers not to work with her. Quinn handled the worst of it, making trips to Omaha and Kansas City to establish relationships with new suppliers, using his quiet charm and straightforward honesty to win people over. Naomi focused on customer service, making sure that everyone who entered her store was treated with respect and given personal attention. One afternoon in early spring, nearly 6 months after their wedding, a familiar face entered the store. It was Douglas Pritchard, the rancher who had been the second man to propose to Naomi. He had been one of the most bitter about her rejection, and she braced herself for confrontation. But Pritchard's expression was not hostile. If anything, he looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot like a nervous schoolboy. "Miss Fletcher, Mrs. Zeller," he began awkwardly. "I wanted to apologize for my behavior after you turned down my proposal. I said some unkind things, did some things I am not proud of, and I have regretted it." Naomi set down the inventory sheet she had been working on. "What brought about this change of heart, Mr. Pritchard?" He smiled ruefully. "I got engaged myself to a woman from Omaha. Emily is her name. And when I realized how I felt about her, how different it was from what I felt when I proposed to you, I understood. You were right to turn me down. I was not offering you love. I was offering you convenience. You deserved better, and I am glad you held out for it." Naomi felt a weight she had not known she was carrying lift from her shoulders. "Thank you for saying that, Mr. Pritchard. It means more than you know, and congratulations on your engagement. I hope you and Emily will be very happy together." "I hope so too," he said. "And Mrs. Zeller, for what it is worth, I am sorry for the trouble some of us caused you and your husband. We were acting like children instead of men. You and Quinn, you have built something good here. The whole town can see it, even those of us who did not want to admit it at first." After he left, Naomi stood alone in the store, feeling as though a chapter of her life had finally closed properly. She had forgiven the men who had made her life difficult, but she had not realized how much she needed one of them to acknowledge their wrongdoing and ask for forgiveness. That evening she told Quinn about the encounter, and he listened with his usual quiet attention. "Does it change how you feel?" he asked. "Knowing that at least some of them have come to understand, it brings me peace," Naomi admitted. "But it does not change the most important thing. I still would make the same choices. I still would turn down every one of them and wait for you." Quinn pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "I would cross 1,000 deserts to find you, Naomi Zeller, in this life or any other." As spring turned to summer, Naomi began to suspect she was pregnant. She waited to be certain before telling Quinn, taking the time to observe the changes in her body, the morning queasiness that faded by afternoon, the tenderness in her breasts, the curious emotional sensitivity that had her tearing up at the smallest kindnesses. When she finally told him, on a warm June evening as they sat together in the garden she had expanded since their marriage, Quinn's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. His face lit up with pure joy, and he gathered her into his arms with such care, as if she were made of spun glass. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly. "Naomi, we are going to be parents. Are you happy?" she asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said. "Terrified, amazed, grateful, all of those things and more. We are going to have a child. A piece of you and a piece of me joined together." They began making preparations immediately. Quinn built a cradle in the evenings after the store closed, working by lamplight to smooth each piece of wood to perfection. Naomi sewed tiny clothes, marveling at how small they were, how impossibly small the person who would wear them must be. They argued playfully about names, Quinn favoring strong, simple names while Naomi preferred something more literary. The pregnancy was not easy. Naomi suffered from severe sickness in the early months, and there were days when she could barely stand without feeling dizzy. Quinn took over more of the store work, insisting she rest, and hired a young woman named Sarah to help with the day-to-day operations. But as the months passed and her belly grew round and heavy, Naomi found a joy in the process that surprised her. She loved feeling the baby move inside her, loved watching Quinn's face light up when he felt those movements too. They spent hours talking about what kind of parents they wanted to be, what values they wanted to instill in their child, what kind of world they wanted to build for the next generation. In late January of 1877, nearly a year after Naomi had first laid eyes on Quinn, she went into labor. It was a long, difficult birth that lasted through the night and into the next day. Quinn stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering words of encouragement when she was certain she could not go on. "You can do this," he told her during one particularly painful contraction. "You are the strongest person I know, Naomi. You can do anything." And finally, after what felt like an eternity, their son was born. He came into the world screaming his displeasure at the cold air, his tiny fists waving, and the midwife placed him on Naomi's chest with a smile. "A healthy boy," she announced. "Congratulations." Naomi looked down at her son, at his red, wrinkled face and shock of dark hair, and felt a love so overwhelming it took her breath away. Quinn leaned over them both, his eyes bright with tears, and touched their baby's tiny hand with one finger. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "I am your father, and this is your mother, the bravest, most wonderful woman in the world." They named him Matthew, a name they both agreed on after weeks of debate. Matthew Quinn Zeller, a fresh start, a new generation, a symbol of the love that had brought his parents together. The early days of parenthood were exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Matthew was a fussy baby who did not sleep well and seemed to need constant attention. Naomi was grateful for Quinn's help, for the way he took to fatherhood with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else. He walked the floor with Matthew in the middle of the night, changed diapers without complaint, and sang off key lullabies that somehow soothed the baby when nothing else would. The store continued to thrive even with the new demands on their time. Sarah proved to be a capable employee who could be trusted to manage things when both Naomi and Quinn needed to focus on their son. The town's attitude toward them had softened considerably, with even former critics stopping by to congratulate them on the birth and coo over the baby. Mrs. Abernathy, who had once lectured Naomi about the necessity of marriage, visited one afternoon with a beautiful hand-knitted blanket for Matthew. "I was wrong about you," the older woman said bluntly. "I thought you were being foolish, holding out for some impossible ideal. But you knew what you were doing. You knew what you needed and you had the courage to wait for it. I should have had more faith in you." Naomi, holding Matthew in her arms, smiled at her. "You were concerned for my well-being. I do not fault you for that. But I am glad you can see now that I made the right choice." As Matthew grew from infant to toddler, the Zeller family became an integral part of Lincoln's community. Quinn joined the volunteer fire brigade and helped with barn raisings and other community projects. Naomi served on the school board and organized fundraisers for various causes. They were respected, liked, and most importantly, happy. On their second wedding anniversary, Quinn took Naomi to the same restaurant where they had shared some of their early courtship dinners. Mrs. Patterson was watching Matthew for the evening, giving them a rare night alone together. "You remember our first dinner here?" Quinn asked as they waited for their food. "You were so nervous that someone would see us and spread more gossip." "I was terrified," Naomi admitted, "but also excited. I had never felt that way before, that combination of fear and anticipation and absolute certainty that I was exactly where I was supposed to be." Quinn reached across the table and took her hand. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." She felt a flutter of concern. "What is it? Are you happy, truly happy? I know that life with me is not what you might have had if you had accepted one of those other proposals. We are not wealthy. You still work hard at the store. We live simply. Do you ever regret your choice?" Naomi looked at this man who had come into her life like an answer to a prayer. She had not known how to speak. She thought about the past 2 years, the challenges they had faced and overcome together, the love that had only grown stronger with time, the son they had created together, the life they had built from nothing but faith and determination. "Quinn Zeller," she said firmly, "I have never regretted a single moment. Yes, we are not wealthy in terms of money, but we are rich in all the ways that matter. We have each other. We have Matthew. We have work that fulfills us and a community that, for the most part, accepts and values us. I have never been happier than I am right now, in this moment with you." His relief was visible, and she realized that he had genuinely been worried, that despite all the evidence to the contrary, some part of him still feared she might wake up one day and regret choosing a drifter over more established men. "I love you," he said simply. "More today than the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." "That is all I ever wanted," Naomi said. "Someone who would grow with me, who would choose me every day the way I choose them. Someone who sees marriage not as a contract or an obligation, but as a partnership built on love and respect and genuine affection." They walked home slowly that night, arm in arm under a canopy of stars. The streets of Lincoln were quiet, most families already tucked into their homes for the night. They could hear piano music drifting from the saloon, the distant bark of a dog, the wind rustling through the cottonwood trees that lined the streets. When they reached their house, they found Mrs. Patterson dozing in the rocking chair, Matthew asleep in his cradle beside her. They thanked her quietly, sent her home, and stood together looking down at their sleeping son. "We made that," Quinn whispered in awe. "This perfect little person came from us." "He is not always perfect," Naomi said with a tired laugh, thinking of the tantrums and the sleepless nights. "But he is ours, and I would not change a thing about him." They went to bed that night wrapped in each other's arms, and Naomi fell asleep thinking about how far she had come from the lonely woman who had stood behind the counter of her father's store, refusing proposal after proposal, waiting for something she could barely articulate. The years that followed brought new challenges and new joys. A second pregnancy ended in a miscarriage that left Naomi heartbroken and Quinn feeling helpless in the face of her grief. But they supported each other through it, and their bond deepened even in the midst of loss. 2 years later, Naomi became pregnant again, and this time she carried the baby to term. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1880, a tiny, fierce little thing with Naomi's green eyes and Quinn's stubborn chin. They named her Rose, and Matthew, now 3 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister. The store continued to expand, eventually taking over the empty building next door. They added more inventory, hired more employees, and became one of the most successful businesses in Lincoln. Quinn's reputation as a fair, honest businessman grew, and he was eventually elected to the town council, a position he took seriously, working to improve conditions for everyone in the community. Naomi used her position and influence to advocate for women's rights, particularly in terms of property ownership and business opportunities. She mentored young women who wanted to open their own shops, sharing the knowledge she had gained through years of trial and error. She became a voice for change, respected even by those who disagreed with her on principle, because no one could deny her success or her integrity. But the heart of their life remained their family. Quinn continued to be a devoted father, spending time with Matthew and Rose even when business pressures mounted. He taught Matthew to ride, to handle responsibility, to treat everyone with respect regardless of their station in life. He read to Rose every night, acted out the stories with different voices that made her giggle uncontrollably, and told her repeatedly that she could be anything she wanted to be when she grew up. Naomi watched her children grow with a mixture of pride and melancholy, knowing that each milestone marked the passage of time, the inevitable movement toward the day when they would leave to build their own lives. But she treasured every moment, every scraped knee she kissed better, every bedtime story, every small triumph and setback. On Matthew's 10th birthday in 1887, the family took a trip to Omaha, staying in a hotel for the first time. It was an adventure for the children, who had never been to a city before. They visited museums and shops, ate at fancy restaurants, and made memories that would last a lifetime. On the last night of the trip, after the children were asleep in the adjoining room, Quinn and Naomi sat together on the balcony of their hotel room, looking out at the city lights. "You ever think about that first day?" Naomi asked. "When you walked into the store and just looked at me?" "I think about it all the time," Quinn admitted. "I think about how close I came to just walking past, to continuing on my way west. What if I had not seen you through that window? What if I had not had the courage to go inside?" "But you did," Naomi said. "You went inside, and you asked me with just a look if I was ready to take a chance on something undefined and possibly impossible. And I said yes with my whole heart." Quinn pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence for a long time, listening to the sounds of the city, thinking about the journey that had brought them here. "I turned down 12 proposals in 1 year," Naomi said softly. 12 men who offered me security, status, respectability. And the town thought I was crazy, throwing away perfectly good opportunities. But I knew, somehow, that there was something better waiting for me. Someone better. I just had to be brave enough to wait for it. "I am glad you waited," Quinn said, his voice rough with emotion. "I am glad you knew your worth and refused to settle for less. I am glad you gave me the chance to love you." "You did not just give me a chance to love you," Naomi corrected. "You gave me a life beyond anything I had imagined. You gave me partnership, equality, passion, respect, and a love that grows deeper with every passing year. You gave me children and a future and a reason to believe in happy endings." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion of first discovery. And afterward, Naomi thought about how intimacy had evolved over the years of their marriage. It was no longer just about physical pleasure, though that remained. It had become a form of communication, a reaffirmation of their bond, a way of saying without words that they chose each other still, would always choose each other. The trip to Omaha became a tradition, something they did every few years as the children grew older and the business allowed for it. They watched Matthew develop into a thoughtful, intelligent young man who loved books as much as his mother and had his father's quiet strength. Rose grew into a spirited girl who questioned everything and refused to accept that there were things girls could not do simply because they were girls. In 1892, when Matthew was 15 and Rose was 12, Quinn's health began to decline. It started with fatigue that he brushed off as the result of long work hours. Then came the persistent cough that would not go away, the weight loss despite eating normally, the night sweats that left him drenched and exhausted. The doctor's diagnosis was grim: consumption, the disease that had claimed so many lives on the frontier. He gave Quinn 6 months, maybe a year if he was lucky. Naomi refused to accept it. She researched every treatment, every possible cure, writing to doctors back east and trying remedies both traditional and experimental. Quinn endured it all with patience, but they both knew the truth. This was a battle he could not win. As his condition worsened, Quinn focused on making sure his family would be taken care of. He updated his will, made sure Naomi understood every aspect of the business, and spent as much time as he could with Matthew and Rose, trying to impart a lifetime of wisdom in the months he had left. One evening in late autumn, as the leaves turned gold and red outside their window, Quinn called his family together. He was confined to bed now, too weak to do much more than sit propped up on pillows, but his mind remained sharp. "I want to tell you all something important," he began, his voice hoarse but determined. "I want you to know that every single day I have spent with you has been a gift. Naomi, you took a chance on a drifter with nothing to his name but a horse and a letter of recommendation. You gave me a home, a purpose, a reason to stop running and start building. Matthew, Rose, being your father has been the greatest privilege of my life." "Do not talk like that," Rose said, tears streaming down her face. "You are going to get better. Mama is going to find a cure." Quinn smiled sadly. "Sweetheart, sometimes there is no cure. Sometimes we just have to accept what is and make the most of the time we have left. I am not afraid of dying. I am only sad that I will not get to see you grow up, will not get to meet your children, will not grow old with your mother the way I planned." Naomi took his hand, holding it tightly. She had shed many tears in private, but now she forced herself to be strong for him and for their children. "You have given us so much, Quinn. You have shown Matthew what it means to be a good man, a loving father, a faithful husband. You have shown Rose that she should never settle for less than she deserves, should never let anyone tell her she is less than because she is a woman. You have shown me that love is real, that it exists outside of books and fairy tales, that it is worth waiting for." Quinn coughed, a deep, rattling sound that scared them all, but when he recovered, he continued. "Matthew, I need you to be the man of the family now. Take care of your mother and sister. Help with the business, but do not sacrifice your own dreams to do it. Promise me you will live your own life." "I promise, Pa," Matthew said, his voice breaking. "And Rose, my fierce little wildflower, do not let anyone dim your light. Do not let anyone tell you that you cannot do something just because you are a girl. Be bold, be brave, be yourself." "I will, Papa," Rose whispered. "Naomi," Quinn said, turning his fading gaze to his wife. "You were worth every mile I traveled, every hardship I endured, every moment of loneliness before I found you. Loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life. Promise me you will not close your heart when I am gone. Promise me you will keep living, keep finding joy, keep being the amazing woman I fell in love with." "I do not want to talk about this," Naomi said, her composure finally cracking. "I do not want to imagine a life without you." "I know," Quinn said gently, "but we have to. Because it is coming whether we want it to or not, and I need to know that you will be all right." They stayed with him through the night, taking turns holding his hand, sharing memories, laughing through tears at stories from their years together. As dawn broke, painting the room in soft golden light, Quinn took his last breath with Naomi's hand in his and his children nearby. The grief was overwhelming. Naomi felt as though part of her soul had been torn away, leaving a wound that would never fully heal. The town came together to support them, bringing food and condolences, helping with arrangements, showing the Zeller family the same kindness Quinn had always shown others. They buried him in the small cemetery on the edge of town, under a cottonwood tree with a simple headstone that read, "Quinn Zeller, beloved husband and father, 1849–1892. He asked with just a look, and she said yes with her whole heart. The months that followed were the hardest of Naomi's life. She threw herself into work, into caring for her children, into anything that would keep her from dwelling on the emptiness in her bed, the silence where his voice should be, the absence of his presence in every corner of their home. Matthew stepped up as Quinn had asked, helping with the business, being a support to his mother and sister. Rose dealt with her grief through anger at first, railing against the unfairness of losing her father when she was still so young. But eventually, her fury gave way to determination to live the kind of life he had wanted for her. Naomi found comfort in the memories they had made, in the knowledge that she had loved fully and been loved in return. She kept her promise to Quinn, continuing to live, continuing to find joy in small things, continuing to be herself. It was what he would have wanted, and honoring his memory meant honoring his wishes. As the years passed, the sharp edge of grief dulled into a manageable ache. Naomi never remarried, though she received several respectful offers from widowers in town. She had loved once with her whole heart, and that was enough for a lifetime. She watched Matthew grow into a man who inherited his father's integrity and his mother's business sense. He took over most of the day-to-day operations of the store, eventually expanding it into a small chain with locations in neighboring towns. He married a sweet-natured schoolteacher named Elizabeth, and they gave Naomi 3 grandchildren who filled her later years with laughter and chaos. Rose, true to her nature, shocked the town by announcing her intention to attend university back east. Naomi supported her completely, using the money she and Quinn had saved over the years to pay for her daughter's education. Rose became a lawyer, one of the first women to practice in Nebraska, and she dedicated her career to fighting for women's rights and social justice. In 1910, At the age of 57, Naomi decided to retire from the business, turning full control over to Matthew and Elizabeth. She spent her days gardening, reading, and volunteering at the library she had helped establish years earlier. She traveled occasionally, visiting Rose in her law office, spending time with her grandchildren, finally seeing some of the places she had only read about in books. But her favorite place remained Lincoln, the town that had once judged her so harshly for refusing to settle, the town that had eventually embraced the life she had built. She lived in the same house she and Quinn had shared, surrounded by memories both sweet and bittersweet. On her 70th birthday in 1923, her family gathered to celebrate. Matthew was there with Elizabeth and their grown children. Rose had come from Omaha with her husband, a fellow lawyer she had met while working on a case. The house was full of noise and love and laughter. And as Naomi looked around at the family that had grown from one simple decision to wait for real love, she felt profoundly grateful. That evening, after everyone had left, Naomi sat alone in the parlor, looking at the photograph of Quinn that hung above the mantel. It had been taken a few years before he died, and in it, he was smiling at something beyond the camera. She remembered the day it was taken, remembered the photographer trying to get Quinn to sit still, remembered how they had laughed afterward at the formality of it all. "I kept my promise," she said softly to the photograph. "I kept living. I kept finding joy. I watched our children grow into amazing adults. I got to meet our grandchildren. I built a good life, Quinn, but I have missed you every single day." She closed her eyes, and for a moment, she could almost feel his presence beside her, could almost hear his voice telling her that he was proud of her, that he had been watching over her, that he was waiting for the day they would be together again. Naomi lived another 7 years, remaining sharp and active until the very end. When she died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 77, the town mourned the loss of a woman who had become a legend in her own right. The newspaper ran a long obituary detailing her accomplishments, her contributions to the community, her role as a pioneering businesswoman and advocate for women's rights. But the part that most people remembered, the story that got told and retold, was the romance. How she had turned down 12 proposals in 1 year, waiting for something more. How a quiet cowboy had walked into her store and asked her with just a look. How she had said yes with her whole heart. How they had built a life together based on love and respect and partnership. How their love story had proved that waiting for the right person was worth it, that real love did exist, that happy endings were possible even in the harsh reality of frontier life. They buried her next to Quinn, and her headstone read, "Naomi Fletcher Zeller, devoted wife and mother, beloved friend and pioneer, 1853–1930. She waited for true love and found it. Years later, long after everyone who had known them personally had passed away, their story lived on. Grandchildren told it to great-grandchildren, and the tale became part of Lincoln's local history, a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is wait for what you truly want. Trust your instincts even when the world tells you you are wrong, and believe that real love is worth holding out for." The store that Naomi and Quinn built together continued to operate well into the 20th century, eventually becoming a historical landmark. The house where they raised their family was preserved and turned into a museum, with photographs and artifacts from their life together on display. But the real legacy they left was not in buildings or businesses. It was in the example they set, the proof they provided that love matches were not just fairy tales, that equal partnerships between husband and wife were possible and preferable, that a woman's worth was not defined by how quickly she married or how prestigious her husband was, but by her character, her choices, and her courage. Naomi had turned down 12 proposals because she knew, deep in her soul, that there was someone out there who would see her not as a convenience or a prize, but as a partner, an equal, a person worthy of genuine love and respect. And she had been right. Quinn had walked into her store on a hot August day in 1876, and with just a look, he had asked her if she was ready to take a chance on something extraordinary. And she had said yes. With her whole heart, with all her courage, with complete faith in the impossible made possible, she had said yes. And that yes had changed everything. It had given them nearly 16 years of marriage, 2 beautiful children, a successful business, a love story that inspired generations. It had proven that waiting was worth it, that intuition could be trusted, that the heart knows things the mind cannot yet comprehend. In the end, Naomi Fletcher's story was not about the 12 men she rejected. It was about the one man she accepted, the one who saw her truly and loved her completely, the one who asked with just a look and received an answer that echoed through eternity. It was a story about courage, about knowing your worth, about refusing to settle for less than you deserve. It was a story about true love in its purest, most powerful form, the kind that transforms lives and creates legacies and proves that some things, some people, are worth waiting for no matter how long it takes. And every time the story was told, every time a young woman doubted whether she should wait for real love or settle for what was convenient, someone would remember Naomi Fletcher and Quinn Zeller. They would remember that true love is not a fairy tale, that it exists in the real world for those brave enough to wait for it, patient enough to recognize it, and courageous enough to say yes when it finally arrives. Their love story became a testament to the power of patience, the importance of knowing your own worth, and the extraordinary things that can happen when 2 people find each other across all the noise and confusion of the world and recognize, in a single moment, in a single look, that they have found what they have been searching for all along. Naomi had waited, and Quinn had found her, and together they had built something beautiful that lasted far beyond their individual lives, touching everyone who heard their story and giving hope to anyone who wondered if real, true, transformative love was possible. The answer, written in the life they lived and the legacy they left, was a resounding yes.